Okay, tell me about that again.
Okay, well, first, my name is Maureen Peltier.
Okay.
And I did serve with the Washington National Guard. I'm now retired. I retired as a staff sergeant. We got orders to answer your first question in 2003, right off the bat. The Marines had just arrived and occupied this country of Iraq. And the first orders we got were for Turkey. My understanding, joining the military just 2 years prior, three years prior, um, from basic training and just kind of the overall, the way things were discussed about the female gender being in the military in those days, or I feel like it's forever ago. Back in those times, we wouldn't see combat, but we would train for it and be prepared for it, but that we'd never really actually see it. So we got orders for Turkey, which was considered to be something we call in the rear, and we were a logistics combat support unit. So at that time, I was a heavy truck operator, 16-ton vehicle. It was called the PLS, Palletized Load System. Amazing vehicle. And that's what I was trained on. That was my specialty, the whole unit's specialty. We had other trucks as well, but that was our specialty truck. And so we were supposed to transport military goods, weapons, anything you think of, from toilet paper to tires to ammo. Any of the needs within country up to the border, and drop it and leave. That was my understanding. What that would have looked like, I to this day would not have, I don't know, because that's not what happened. What happened was about a few days, I forgot exactly how many, but a few days prior to mobilization, we were given what we call a FRAGO. And that FRAGO was a redirect order. And we were told that we would be placed into the combat zone of Baghdad, Iraq. And so that was a shock. The boys were happy. We were hooting and hollering. And most of us females, the wiser gender, we were a little quieter. I was in a state of shock, and so I was super quiet. When I'm in shock or upset, I'm quiet. And that's when I didn't realize that my military career had gotten very real. At that moment, things had gotten very real. I actually thought I'd go and die.
And so when you got over to Iraq, did you find that the equipment was equivalent to the U.S. Army, or was it a lower grade, or what was the trucks and stuff like?
Well, to explain that better, everything that we had in country and what we trained with was what we shipped with. And that was training equipment, meaning was it ready for VBIDs, vehicle improvised bombs, or other roadside bombs? No, we were not prepared for that. We were what we would call a soft target vehicle at that time. We did not have the steel enforced frames or body that were necessary to minimize some of the damage at best from things like tank bombs and VVIDs that would run into us. So no, we were very unprepared for the combat that we were facing, and a lot of the specialists were from out of country. And there's other questions I've had ever since getting in there. I did notice that the borders were sparse with security, if any. It seemed that the borders were just wide open everywhere, meaning if we're going to occupy a country, then, and what I noticed is a lot of the enemy combatants were not even Iraqi, unless they were recruited or coerced. A lot of the enemy combatants, especially one that targeted me early on, they were from Iran.
They were from Iran, and
yeah, we just let them flood the border. I don't understand that to this day.
Yeah.
Nobody want to answer those questions.
And so you told me about 2 accidents that you were involved in. Can you tell me about those?
Well, they weren't accidents.
Okay.
I wish. They were events or incidences, is what we would call them, combat incidences. One, I think that the number one, the target where myself and my co-driver, was a target. It was actually a rare occurrence that day. We didn't usually put two females in a truck together. It wasn't a gender, prejudice. It's just because there was a target, a price on the females' heads. The enemy combatants had made it clear that they desired to hurt Americans. And by hurting Americans, they would take their daughters. And we were considered the daughters, the mothers. And so it would hurt Americans here at home more so to see us captured and tortured and maybe even worse. So that was the word on the street, or the intel that we got. And it was prudent for us to try to mix it up in a combat support unit where we had both genders. And also make sure our activities were not only unknown for obvious reasons, but mix those activities up too, not have a set pattern. Well, this was not a set pattern. This was definitely different. We'd been to this base a lot, but this was not an everyday occurrence. It was a long distance. And it was myself and another female. I had been assigned this vehicle, but not assigned my very own co-driver to the vehicle, or, we both drive and co-drive, we shake it up. But I was the only one primarily assigned to this vehicle. Had not had my own co-driver, and they threw her in with me on this mission. And she's great. I couldn't have picked a better female, or if I had picked a female myself, I would have picked her. Anywho, so we got to the destination. Everything was fine, except, well, not fine. I did notice some anomalies on the way that I was suspicious, mildly suspicious oddities or activities. Reportable to the extent of I noticed. And a reaction, no reaction necessary. We got there, though, without incident. It was when we left the base that the enemy combatant then engaged us. And by engaged us, this was not an on-the-ground fight. This was vehicle upon vehicle. My vehicle, we were leaving through an interstate, what we call State Irish Route 10, to head back towards Baghdad. And I was going to make that left turn with my convoy. Several vehicles had already made that turn in front of me, and several Iraqi vehicles, citizens, had already stopped. And the rule of engagement at that time was for everybody to stop and let us pass. We had our air horns blaring and all the signals that Iraqis were familiar with, and everything was operational, everything was standard. As I'm going through that intersection in my left side preview, I can see him, the vehicle. It was a large vehicle, not just a car, not just a mini truck, a very large, like what I call the Muppet Show bus. That's kind of common out there. And I could see him coming, and I could see that he was perfectly lined up to my fuel tank, which was one. I had two fuel tanks, but the one on my driver's side was right behind me. My imagination led to immediately that I will die, and there will be an explosion because the fuel tank and a bomb. And, but we didn't have high octane fuel. So if there was a detonation, I may have actually survived it, but in my mind I was prepared to not survive that event. So that was, we weren't engaging with anybody. We were a combat support unit. We moved things from place to place. We even brought in shipments and supplies to the Iraqi citizens. And we did actually achieve what I would call honorable intent or actions that we felt our government was there for, we thought, and that was very apparent to us, that we were conducting good activities to rebuild the nation of Iraq, for them to be independent from us, to get out of there ASAP. And as we all know, we have not done that.
Okay, and the vehicle impacted your vehicle?
Yes, it did. The bomb did not detonate. It was inspected, or the investigation turned out that it was the intent to kill by VBID. It was a miracle, and he did absolutely wreck my truck and my fuel tank and my driveline. I got away to a certain distance, what I would call out of the kill zone, or what we would call in the military out of the kill zone. My truck was able to, had some momentum and power left to get me out of that kill zone. His vehicle had attached to my vehicle, and where the fuel tank and driveline third axle area location was behind me. And I pinched him in the roadway, and then I straightened out and was able to let go of him on completion of my turn, which was at the edge of like a small cliff on my passenger side. She said she saw no road and just downhill from there. But we made it just in time, the turn and completion. When I straightened out, my vehicle let go of his vehicle, and I just kept carrying on with my trailer and everything. I had kind of pinched him with my trailer is what I did. And my intent was to get him and me out of the way from the convoy behind me so that they weren't blocked and they would be in a kill box themselves in a fight, so they can just keep driving.
Okay. So they hit your vehicle with a suicide bomb.
Yeah, it was the intent for him to die. They didn't die. He had a passenger who jumped out the last second, is what witnesses behind me in my convoy had told me. And then the other one, I actually met him face to face. He had no weapon on him, so there was nothing I can do with him. But he was detained briefly, then released. But then when his identity was figured out, he was known to be an Iranian terrorist, and already released. So early on in the game, we didn't even hold on to them very long. So.
And what about the second accident?
It was another incident that I was not involved in, but the unit had been involved in a firefight on the ground.
Okay.
It was outstanding, actually. I heard everything over the radio. I was on base that day, but that was another convoy that had gone out. I can't remember the location they were in, to tell you the truth, but it was a hot zone, and they were going through a town. It was narrow. I'm familiar by memory because I've been there before.